So today we are going to take a look at Mindset by Carol Dweck. Um, I like this book quite a bit, and so the central thesis is, well, it's more of a model. She creates a model of two basic mindsets you can have. You can either have a growth mindset or a fixed mindset, and then she goes in quite a bit of detail and a ton of examples, providing both ramifications and how you can look at it. And so, in a growth mindset, you believe that your abilities are largely a consequence of your effort and your learning, and they're constantly in flux. You can become better at something, you can become worse at something. And a fixed mindset is that it's largely talent that determines how good you are at something. And okay, so the ramifications of this are pretty interesting, and so I'll talk about some of the examples and then I'll get into the ratings. So the first and most basic one is a placebo effect, where if you think that your efforts or that skill is largely the result of effort, then it's a self-fulfilling prophecy in a sense, in that you will look to find ways to improve, you'll practice, and you will improve. The same token, if you have a fixed mindset and you're like, oh, I'm not good at this, also a self-fulfilling prophecy, because what you will do is you will give up more easily and just not engage. And this is another one of the ramifications of having a fixed mindset, is your value is often tied to your performance in a way that creates high pressure situations, because if you think that ability is fixed, then your worth will be basically the equivalent of whatever your latest data point is. And so every situation is one in which you are demonstrating whether or not you were good enough. And if you have a bad performance, you might feel like you've been a fraud and you've been terrible all along if you don't think that performance can improve. Also, performance in anything is kind of like a distribution curve. It's like a bell curve where you're going to have good performances and bad performances, even if like the fixed mindset was correct. But anyways, so that's one of the more interesting things, is it creates a lot more performance anxiety, which in turn just makes you disengage from the activity, and also much more willing to engage in unethical behavior, as per the quote that's on the splash. They did this study, which, like, this kind of blew my mind, is when they told the students, when they applauded them for their performance, what happened was, or like when they applauded their performance and said, oh, you're so smart, they're applauding the characteristics themselves. What happened was the students became much more likely to cheat on tests to try and keep demonstrating that they're smart, right? Because their self-worth got tied to the performance, and being smart is just either you are or you aren't type of thing in terms of how it's handled conceptually. Whereas the other example, the growth mindset, if you praise students' efforts, what happened was they applied more effort, and they didn't just start lying about test scores. I forget how they set up the experiment. It was such where you could lie about your result. They gave you an opportunity to lie about your result to put it higher in a way that no one would ever find out. And lo and behold, the ones who were praised for being intelligent lied about their test scores, and the ones who were praised for their efforts did not. And also, they just engaged and became more interested in the subject. And long term, I think there was another study, long term, having the growth mindset was a better predictor of performance, just because. Okay. Let's see. I'm trying to think of. She has a ton of examples from sports and business. I think, like, for example, Enron. There's a ton of. I think she covers McEnroe and tennis. where he was had a bit of a fixed mindset. He would get very upset a lot in his performances. Perhaps didn't put a tremendous amount of effort into getting better because he just felt he was a very strong player. Fixed mindset. There's one other point I wanted to mention. Maybe I'll remember it, but let's get into the ratings. And so utility, I struggled a lot for utility. I think you could give it plus or minus 1. And here's the reason. The book outlines the mindset ideas very quickly. And you could kind of just read like the first 2 chapters. And then you get the idea. And I think it's a very useful idea. And so that makes me want to give it. And it's also explained very well. And so that makes me want to give it a high score. At the same time, she gives a ton of examples, just like a ton, throughout. Like the book is, a book of this length is not needed to explain the idea, but the examples are very thorough. So, to some extent, I want to give it an 8.5 because I think that the examples and the thoroughness are nice, and that the idea is of thinking of things in terms of fixed growth mindset. I think that idea is very strong, and it's a useful idea, so I want to give it a high score. At the same time, I kind of want to give it a 6.5 because I felt that while the idea is good, the idea is communicated very quickly, and it's perhaps not efficient to provide that many examples. But you can kind of stop reading whenever you want. Not that I think that the book's bad, if you're trying to get ideas very efficiently, perhaps you don't want to read the whole book. So, I ended up compromising, giving it a 7.5. Entertainment, I gave it a 6. It's interesting when you come across a particular figure that you're interested in, that she uses as an example. So I think it's entertaining to that degree. Okay. For interest, I gave it a 5. And the idea, I don't think that the idea is especially mind-blowing. But it is one that perhaps is mind-blowing if you've never consumed any self-help or any psychology literature, but it's okay, growth versus fixed. It's not, when you like read it, it's not like, wow, that's crazy. It's like, oh, that makes a lot of sense. But it's important to be said. And some of the literature and some of those studies she cites those are like, wow, that's nuts. Like, so maybe interest should be a little higher. Like, the kids don't lie about their scores unless they're praised for being intelligent. So praising your student for qualities, or your kid, can make them like more deceptive because they become attached to that sort of feedback, and they feel that the only way to get that is to have that great performance, right? And that they constantly need to do it because they think abilities are fixed. Whereas if you praise effort, or I think if you were going to like try and think of the better way to approach, feedback for kids, is and this comes from a lot of different sources. This is a little bit of an aside. In general, you want to just critique the performance more so than the child themselves. So, let's say you want to call a child stupid, which I don't think you should. You should call their behavior dumb, right? Or whatever thing, like, be like, oh, that wasn't a good decision. Or, like, talk about the decision not being good, not the child being dumb or what have you. Or even smart. Like, don't call the child smart. Say, oh, that's a smart question. That's a smart decision. That sort of thing. Because you don't want to... They are able to change their questions and their performance, but they can't change something intrinsic to them. And they perhaps don't have, and to a lesser degree, adults, don't have the ability to make the distinction between, like, performance and who they are, and by critiquing performance or praising performance, you empower them to change it, because the performance feels much more changeable than who one is. Under a lot of worldviews, people feel like they can't change who they are, but they can change what they do. And this actually ties in quite a bit with with the mindset, Carol Dweck stuff. Novelty, I gave it an 8.5. I think that if you've never, it's maybe not a hard type of idea to be exposed to, but if you've never been exposed to the idea that thinking that you can grow and change stuff through disciplined effort, if you've never been exposed to that, that's actually catastrophically bad. And so I scored novelty fairly high, not because it's, novel in the traditional sense, but novel in the way I'm scoring, where it's a cross-section of how hard is it to find this idea and how important is it that you find this idea, where it's very important you find this idea, but maybe not so hard to find it. Style, I gave it style, readability, and difficulty. We have 7, 8, 8. The reason being, with all the examples and the plain language, even though she covers quite a few studies, she has a PhD, I think it's in psychology. I'd be shocked if it was something else. She makes the ideas very accessible, and then the examples make it very easily digestible. That's something I struggle with in my writing. I think I don't provide enough examples, but it is very accessible. So the overall rating is a 7.14. And back on the accessibility part, this I think would be a type of book I would recommend very generally, very broadly, specifically to people who I think maybe would not be, would have difficulty reading perhaps a full book. This one's very easy to digest. It's broken up in nice sections. And most of the value in the book being front-loaded in the first 2 chapters is also really valuable, I think. And then they can just read at their leisure, entertainment-wise and stuff like that. And so I would strongly recommend this book, actually, perhaps over the 7.14 score, to anyone who thinks that talent is the biggest predictor of success. Like, you have it or you don't. To anyone like that, I would strongly recommend this book. If you don't believe that, then maybe I'd still recommend this book pretty generally, but not as strongly. There's a few other books that, like Talent is Overrated is another book that's good for that, where they talk more about, if you spend 10,000 hours practicing something, you will outperform just about anyone who has 1,000 hours, unless you have like a physical disability and they don't, or something to that effect. It is absolutely profound what having 10x practice time will do, and the no amount of talent in 1,000 hours of practice will not surpass 10,000 hours of practice, or talent in 1,000 will not surpass 10,000 hours. And so it's just, a lot of times it's just brute force effort, and having a mindset that's good for that is very productive. So I would like to, as far as discussion goes, discussion idea is, what is one example you have of something that you thought wasn't something you could do, but then you made an effort to do it, and you found out you could do it, and not only could you do it, you were fairly good at it, or became good at it. Or an example of something you sucked at, and you kept at it, and you became very good at it eventually. If you like this video, feel free to give it a like, or subscribe if you want to see more, and have a good one.